Thanks for coming to Discovery class today. So glad you could come along. This week I had something land on my head and I crowned my bean, so if I look a little oddball, it's just a Band-Aid. And I haven't gone to a barber. If you take a look, but there's hope coming. Mary told me she's going to buy me a dog tag. So pour yourself another coffee and a tea, and let's go to work. Bill Withers, in his childhood, he grew up in a coal mining district. His dad was a miner. His friends' dads were a miner. His girlfriend's dads were a miner. Even his pastor was a miner. Now, Bill Withers was an African American, and they lived in a community there in that little town, and everything was derelict. Houses were poor, streets were poor, streetlights were poor. But even the name of the town was quite comical, because where he lived and went to school, it wasn't very attractive. His town's name was Slab Fork, Virginia. Now, down in the States, there are some comical names for little towns. Where I pastored many years ago, there were two towns near us. One was called Normal, and the other was called Oblong. And when they'd put an announcement in one of the newspapers about a young couple getting married, it would say, "Normal boy marries oblong girl." Well, this poor fellow Withers, growing up there in West Virginia, he had a hobby. He taught himself music. And he strung his guitar and his ukulele, and he'd play for the school dances, or sometimes, in the end, he ended up playing for the commencement. He left home, and he left that small town in West Virginia, and he went to the West Coast. But when he got there, he was so homesick. His heart, even though everything was poor back home and it was derelict, that's where he lived, those were his friends, that was his family, and that's what he missed. Now, Bill Withers was not a songwriter, but when he was on the West Coast, he wrote a song, and it became very popular. You'll know it when I tell it to you, because his words are so familiar, but the message really has a real ring. Here's what he wrote. "Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. For it won't be long. I'm going to need someone to lean on." There's a story in a tiny little book in the Old Testament, sandwiched between the book of Judges and the book of 1 Samuel, that has that theme. I'm going to need someone to lean on. It's made up of only 4 chapters. It's called the Book of Ruth. My class lesson today, I've entitled, "Lean on Me." The Book of Ruth is a short Old Testament narrative set in the time of the Judges. The nation of Israel does not have a king yet, but they've entered the Promised Land and they're beginning to settle in. This all took place in the 12th century before Christ. What was it like living at that time in Ruth? Well, it was chaotic, very bewildering for the people of God. There were some triumphs of faith. Remember the story of Samson? He was a judge. But there was a lot of failure, and there was a great deal of darkness. The reason I like the story of Ruth, it's because it's very realistic. They're realistic about the joys and the sorrows in the ordinary lives of people, just like you and me, who trust in God. This story is going to warm your heart, and it's deeply significant because Ruth is going to become an ancestor to Jesus Christ. Do you think God knows what's going on in the midst of the virus? It's got the whole world locked up. you think God knows anything about that? Do you think God knows what's going on during this stormy time when the judges ruled? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is a God. God does care. God does rule. And God provides. The book of Ruth starts off with these words. Long ago, when the judges ruled, Israel had just come through years of upheaval. They were now struggling to settle into the land, and they have all kinds of economic and moral and social pressures. The book of Ruth pulls back a curtain, and it lets you look right into their darkness. You're going to see ordinary people facing ordinary events, telling their story. And that's why you're going to identify with the book, because God cares for you just as he did for them. And God looks at details. Little details mean an awful lot to God. Do you know that he knows the number of hairs on your head? Well, I know some of you are saying, well, I know how many you got on your head, Ron. But God has the details. The story of Ruth is the tale of three widows, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. These bereaved widows are all known by name. Their relationship with one another, their faithfulness to God, the inspiration that they're going to gain, and you're going to find that what you see in them in the end is quite remarkable. You may not know it, but names in the Hebrew culture was very significant. The name Naomi means pleasant, and it also means lovely, and it also means delightful. You will see the significance of those names as we see the story unfold. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, his name means, my God is king. That's a good name for the head of the household, don't you think? In Hebrew culture, to know a person's name is to know their character. And the name is the person. His character is the person. And it's a terrible thing if your name is destroyed. Here's how the story of Ruth begins. Elimelech and Naomi, married couple, they leave Bethlehem in Judea. They have two sons. One is Mahlon and the other is Chilion. Famine strikes the town. Bethlehem, meaning house of bread, has no bread. People are dying. Elimelech takes his little family of four and they travel east. And they cross the Jordan River and they enter the land of Moab. Today's city, or the country of Jordan, was the country of Moab. They find food. They settle down. The boys grow up and they marry two Moabite girls. One is Ruth and the other is Orpah. And then the worst thing happens. Elimelech dies, Naomi's husband. We don't know how he died. The Bible doesn't tell us. She becomes a widow. Mahlon dies, her oldest son. Ruth, his wife, becomes a widow. How he died, not sure. Mahlon dies. Orpah's a widow. Don't know how he died either. Now we have the tale of three widows. Naomi, the older, she takes over. She says to her daughters-in-law, I'm leaving you. I'm going back home where I came from. You stay here. You'll find a new husband among your own people. Don't worry about me. God will keep an eye on me. He'll look after me. Orpah obeys. She stays home with her own people. Ruth has other ideas. She says to her mother-in-law, I'm going with you. I'm going back to your homeland. Naomi says, no, you're not. You're not coming with me. You're staying here. Be like Orpah. I'm going back by myself. You do as you're told. You stay here. Then come these very famous words from the lips of Ruth. They're often quoted at a wedding ceremony. They're found in the 16th verse of the first chapter of Ruth. Here's what Ruth says. Don't beg me to leave you or to stop following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Naomi said, okay, if that's what you wish, follow me. And they left Moab together, and they headed back to Bethlehem. Two new widows. Lean on me when I'm not strong. I'll be your friend to carry on. When Naomi returns to her homeland, people barely recognize her. They stare at her and they talk about her behind her back. They say, is this really Naomi? The one that left back then with her husband Elimelech? Is that her? Naomi's reply, don't call me Naomi. I'm not who you think I am anymore. I'm not my name Pleasant anymore. I'm not lovely anymore. I'm not delightful anymore. Call me bitter. Call me Mara. That's the Hebrew word for bitterness. She tells a story of her loss and how they all became widows. Call me vinegar from now on because that's who I am. I'm bitter. The Almighty has made my life very sad, she says. Do you know the word translated Almighty is the Hebrew word for Shaddai, which means ruler. Naomi places her suffering into the hand of God, her ruler. Do you do that? When you suffer? Leave me alone, you shout. Call me Mara. Just give me that name, Vinegar. Leave me alone. That's what happens. But you know, God doesn't give up on you, and God doesn't give up on me, and he didn't give up on Naomi. When bad things happen, you and I are always affected. We feel it, and we feel it psychologically, and we feel it physically, and we feel it spiritually. We're beat up. And when you're beat up and you're downtrodden, our ability to think rightly about God and ourselves and others is often skewed. But God doesn't leave Naomi in a desperate state. In fact, she gets delivered. Her dark night of the soul goes very deep. Some of you can identify with that. Such utter despair, such utter blackness. Remember this, we worship a God who doesn't give up on us. Naomi directs Ruth to the harvest field. The famine is past. Remember, Elimelech and Naomi left Judea long ago because of famine. Well, the rains have returned, and the fields are plentiful again. It's harvest time. Naomi directs Ruth to the harvest field, and if she's going to survive, if her daughter-in-law Ruth is going to survive, the harvest field is where it's going to play out. Now, in the Jewish nation, all those years ago, they had a wonderful welfare system. Do you know what it was? Every farmer that had a field of grain was not allowed by law to harvest the corners of all the fields, because the corners belonged to the poor. And the poor could come, bring their little baskets, and they could cut the grain, and they could take it home and winnow it, and that would become their bread. And if you did not allow the poor into your field to harvest the corners, you could go to jail. Well, Ruth, told by her mother-in-law, I want you to go to a field and you're going to harvest the corners. Well, that's what she did. Now, there's a stranger that's going to come into our story. His name is Boaz. He's going to show up in our plot. Keep your eye on Naomi. Talk about thinking ahead. Do you know, when Naomi came back into the land, she may have had this in mind all along. Not sure. But she was very proactive. Let me tell you what she did. She's about to make something happen. Now, defeat, she's had it. Death, she's faced it. Famine, been there. There's debt, she hasn't got a dime. And there's terrible loss. But let me show you what Naomi demonstrates. She gives real courage here. Clear thinking, amazing fortitude, a woman's real intuition, good judgment, and finally, there's going to be ultimate riches. In chapter 2, verse 12, here's what it says. May the Lord reward you for all you have done. May your wages be paid in full by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for shelter. How do you cope? Is that a fair question? When people talk about you? Can you sing the song, Lean on Me, when you're not strong? I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. Our sense of identity is often rooted in all kinds of things. Maybe your identity is rooted in your gender. You're a male or a female. Maybe it's rooted in family. You got a famous family. Maybe it's ethnicity. Maybe it's class distinction. Is that what gives you your identity? Education, ambition, good looks, how tall you are, what the color of your hair is, color of your eyes, the language you speak, even your genuine smile. Is that your identity? Boaz noticed this servant girl in the corner of the field of his farm and how hard she worked. And he noticed that she never really took a rest. She didn't stop working. Everyone else had a coffee break. Not Ruth. He inquired of his servants who she was. He found that she wasn't an Israelite at all. She was a Moabite. Boaz commended her for her faithfulness and her commitment. And he speaks of her as one defined almost like a Hebrew of a covenant keeper, and took refuge under the Lord's wings. Here she was safe. And then when you get down to verse 14 of chapter 2, it emphasizes that she and Boaz, at lunchtime, they ate together and they had lunch together. Ruth comes home from the field at the end of the day, and she tells all these things that are happening to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Naomi ponders what she has heard from Ruth, and then she comes up with a plan that's going to take care of her, poor as she is, and it's even a bigger plan because it's going to take care of Ruth, who's a foreigner in a Jewish territory. Naomi told her daughter-in-law, verse 20, chapter 2, the Lord bless him. He continues to be kind to us, both the living and the dead. And then Naomi told Ruth, Boaz, the owner of the farm, is one of our close relatives who should take care of both of us. chapter 2, verse 20. Are you familiar with the term levirate marriage? The word levirate is spelled Levirate. Here's what a levirate marriage in the Jewish custom was. A childless widow could marry a male relative of her late husband who could give her a son. The son would be given the name of her first husband. Could God be in the plans, do you think, of what Naomi is cooking up here? Lean on me. Discovery class. Have you ever thought of doing something good, but you were too frightened to do it because of the potential consequences if it didn't work? Well, prepare your heart. Watch for what's going to happen here in our story. Sometimes fear will hold you back. Well, don't let it. I told you that Naomi had a plan. No holding her back now. Watch what she's about to do. She encourages Ruth to go to the field again. And she's going to put words into Ruth's mind that Ruth is going to share with Boaz. Do you know what it is? Ruth is going to ask Boaz to marry her. What? Women don't ask men to marry them. That's the man's job. Well, you ladies know all about that. Remember when your husband waited and waited and waited and waited and you wondered if he was ever going to ask you? Well, Ruth isn't going to wait because her mother-in-law said, don't wait. Now, the custom was when the harvest was over and all the grain was safely in the barn, the owner of the farm would throw a big harvest party. Everybody was invited, the whole town. The harvesters came, the relatives came, the boys and girls came, the rabbi came. The whole village was invited. No one was left out. It was like a Thanksgiving feast, like none other. Roast lamb and calf on a spit. The best wine flowed. Grapes, pomegranates, figs, dates, honey, music, dancing, party. What a party. Naomi and Ruth, they went to the harvest feast together. Ruth, she dressed up in her finest. Picture it. She pleated her hair. She wore her best Moabite go-to-party dress. No doubt she dabbed both of her ears with her version of Chanel No. 5. Don't know if she wore lipstick, but she did wear her prettiest earrings. And as the party came to a close, Boaz had eaten his fill, and his heart was merry with wine, the scripture says, and he headed home for the night. Unknown to him, Ruth was taken by Naomi to Boaz's house ahead of time, before he got home. And Ruth crawled into his bed. Ruth said to Naomi, "What if he takes advantage of me? He'll be drunk. I'm an attractive woman. You know what he's going to do." Naomi said, "I want you to exercise astonishing courage. I'll pray that God watches over you. He'll keep you, and he won't let Boaz touch you. I'm going to leave you alone now. I'll see you when you get home." When Boaz crawled into bed, he found beside him this beautiful creature. I'll let the scripture describe what happened. Chapter 3, verse 9 of Ruth. Boaz asked, "Who are you?" She said, "I am Ruth. I'm the servant girl. Remember me?" She said, "Spread your cover over me because you're a relative of mine, and I'm going to ask you to take care of me." And she quotes to him the Levirate law as applied to a widow without a child from her marriage. What do you suppose was Boaz's reaction? Verse 10. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he said. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed me earlier in the harvest field. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid anymore. I won't touch you, but I'll do for you what you asked. You proposed a marriage?" He said, "I'll accept. Ruth, I want you to marry me." He was so impressed by her actions. She hadn't run after youth. She didn't run after good looks in a younger man. She didn't want wealth, even though he was very wealthy. She didn't want power, even though he was the ruler in the community. The Hebrew word here for kindness, it says, he showed her kindness to me. The word kindness is the word hesed in Hebrew. It means faithfulness. Boaz used the word to describe Ruth. Hesed. Ruth, your faithfulness is beyond all others. Ruth lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could recognize her. But before she left, Boaz poured into her shawl 6 measures of barley. Do you know how much that is? That's a whole bushel. That was enough grain to supply Naomi and Ruth for bread for 2 months. When Ruth came home to her mother-in-law, Naomi said to her, "How did you get along? What happened over there?" Verse 16. Then she told her everything Boaz had done. You know, maybe there's some widows that are listening to our class, and you've got a Boaz in your life. He likes you and you like him. Has he ever asked you if maybe you'd like to be a partner for life for him? Well, I know what you're going to say. Well, we could, but he won't ask me. He's a bit shy, he's a bit timid, and I think he's a bit bashful. Well, why don't you be like Ruth? Why don't you put some words in his mouth? Why don't you tell him, you know, you've got so much to give. You're so pleasant in discussion. You're wise. You're faithful. You've been a wonderful leader in our community. Have you ever thought of getting married? He'll probably say, well, I thought about it. Then I want you to pop the question. Will you say, well, would I fit the bill? Do you think you'd marry me? Try it. I'll make a deal with you. If he says yes, I'll do the wedding. And do you know how much it'll cost you? Nothing. But one thing you have to promise, when you come home from your honeymoon, you'll let Mary and I take you out for a hot dog. Is that a deal? She told her everything. And they got married. Boaz and Ruth. They had a baby boy. His name was Obed. He became the father of Jesse, who became the father of King David, who was of the lineage of Jesus. The man who takes on a levirate marriage is known as a kinsman redeemer. Well, what does that mean? Well, it reminds you of what Christ did for you and me. He redeemed us. When God rescued Ruth, he also rescued you and me. Christ became your kinsman redeemer. and mine. Thomas Alva Edison. He was born February the 11th, 1847. He died October the 18th, 1931, at the age of 84. Thomas Edison has been called America's greatest inventor. At the patent office in Washington, and he had many patents in many other countries, but he held at that time 1,093 patents to his name. Do you know what they included? The light bulb in your house, the phonograph player, the motion picture camera, the generator down at the station in Niagara Falls, the street lights, all the substation, your toaster there in the kitchen. I could go on and on. He had two buddies later in his life, and you would know their name. One was Henry Ford, cars, and the other was Harvey Firestone, tires. They became partners in business. He had a wonderful research laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. It was there that became a historical site, and that's where Edison today is buried. The Edison Electric Company is the largest electricity company in the world, and that's Edison's legacy. Well, when Edison was just 9 years old, his teacher said to him at school, "Thomas, I want you to clear out your desk, and I want you to take this piece of paper," which she folded into an envelope, and said, "I'd like you to take this home, and I want you to give it to your mother." And the teacher instructed him, "Only your mother, I want to read this." When he got to the house, she took the letter and began reading. Her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Edison began to sob. Thomas tried to comfort her, and he asked her, he said, "Mommy, what does the letter say?" She gathered herself and dried her eyes with her apron, and she said to her son, "Your child is a genius, and this school is too small for him. He is so advanced that our teachers are not good enough for him. Please teach him yourself." Mrs. Edison did. From that moment on, Thomas Alva Edison was self-taught. He would call himself homeschooled, I suppose, if we use today's language. And when you read any of his biographies, and it says education, under each one is entitled self-taught. Many years after Edison's mother had died, and he became the greatest inventor of that century, Mrs. Edison didn't live long enough to see all his accomplishments. One day, in going through his mother's effects, which he had stacked away in one of his closets, he found the letter that the teacher had given him to take home that day when he was 9 years old. He read the letter. Here's what it said. "Your son, Mrs. Edison, is mentally deficient. We won't let him come back to school anymore. He won't amount to anything." Edison read the letter in disbelief. He picked up his diary, and in it he wrote these words: "Thomas A. Edison was a mentally deficient child who was changed by his mother. The earth is still measuring his amount." Ruth was a Moabite, poor widow, won't amount to anything. She became the lineage of the Son of God. Now, you may not think you're going to become anything either. when you came home from Sunday school, the devil wrote you a letter and said, you're not going to amount to anything. Do you know that because of Jesus Christ, you too have become part of his lineage? Don't anyone ever tell you you won't amount to anything. That's not true. You will. Amen. Well, I must tell you a story from the sunny side of the street before I let you go. I always want to put a smile on your face before I close out. This is a story that happened to me years ago, right here in this church. On a rainy day or maybe a snowy day, I used to go across the street and just take a break, and I would walk the Kmart store. Now, Kmart's not there anymore, but Kmart, way back in the 70s, was really the Walmart of the Northwest. And it was the same size store, had everything. Well, one day when I went over to the mall, to the store to walk, I went in the door, and sitting just inside the door was a security guard. He had on his uniform, and as I walked by, I said, "Keep an eye on me, I'm a shoplifter." I don't know why I said that, but you know, that man followed me all over the store. I couldn't get rid of him. Now, we had, as part of that store, the drugstore, the druggist was a member of our congregation. His name was Skip Gibson. And I waved at Skip when I left, but I couldn't wait to get out of there. Sometime later, my secretary came into my office and said to me, "Ron, there's a couple that wants to meet you. Can I usher them in?" I said, "Yeah, by all means, bring them in." So they sat down, and they were a delightful couple. They were in their mid-60s, I think. And what they wanted was they wanted to get married. And they wondered if I would do the wedding. Well, I was delighted. And she had a house about 3 blocks over here, way behind the Kmart store. And when they were done, I said to them, I said, "How was it that you heard about me?" He said, "Do you remember a day when you went into the Kmart store and you said to that security guard, 'Keep an eye on me, I'm a shoplifter'?" I said, "Well, who told you that?" He said, "I was that security guard." Do you know that when I did the wedding, he introduced me to all his friends as the shoplifter? I thought that was really cute. Okay, that's enough for today. Will you be back next week? I'm going to look for you. God bless you.